Give me a second. All right. So, hello and welcome to this edition of the Sankofa African series. My name is Dr. Akwe. I'm your rotational host for today's panel discussion. Like I said, there are four of us. So, I've been doing it for a while now. It's Friday, January 19, 2024. It's 10 a.m. US Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Ghana time, 5 p.m. South African time, and 6 p.m. Uganda time. I take this opportunity to welcome all our listeners and viewers on the various social media platforms. For those joining us for the first time, this is the Sankofa African Affairs Program, a global and current affairs virtual panel discussion aimed at informing and educating Africans in the diaspora and on the continent about great powers, strategic relations, and policies towards the continent. And also we delve into other contemporary issues and challenges facing the African continent. So what we've been doing for the past 5 months, we've been focusing our attention on US strategic relations with the African continent. And these relations or this strategies is based on what we call the 3Ds, right? 3Ds, what defense, diplomacy, and development, right? So today we are continuing with this series, right? But this time our focus is still on the defense strategy. So the defense is part of the 3 strategies of the US towards the African continent. So today's topic is African coup and democratic consolidation, the challenges of US military assertiveness and African armed forces military used as Posse Comitatus. So for those of our online listeners, they'll be asking, what is Posse Comitatus, right? I'll just give a brief explanation, and as we get into the discussion, we'll get a more understanding of it. Right, so when we use the term Posse Comitatus, right, we will get into this during the course of the programming, but the term, according to the Brennan Center for Justice, takes its roots in British and American law. A Posse Comitatus is a group of people who are mobilized by the sheriff to suppress lawlessness in the country. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, in a classic Western movie or film, you see a situation whereby a lawman gathers a posse, a group of people, to pursue those outlaws, right? When they are doing that, we say they are doing what you call a comitatus. So that's how the concept of what the term Posse Comitatus came about. So as we do always, we bring together what scholars, professionals, academics, consultants, and experts across the African continent and in diaspora to discuss the topic and share their perspectives as a way of informing and educating, right, what our numerous listeners and viewers around the world. Today's discussion is so critical to the extent that it goes to deal with the foundational defense and enforcement and law enforcement challenges plaguing some, if not all, African countries in terms of the role that the military or the armed forces should play in defending African states from external threats, while also engaging in domestic law enforcement and coups. We've seen over the years, since 2008, African countries have been wrestling with the issue of coup d'etats, right? So today's topic goes into look at some of the drivers of some of these conflicts, right? So coups have seen a resurgence in the Sahel and what you call CWA, which is known as the Coastal West African sub-regions, with the most recent attempted and failed coup in Sierra Leone, right? So coups in Africa has been characterized by experts as a low-hanging fruit, right? That means they are easy pickings or quick wins for the military, right? As a result of their close proximity to capital cities. We've seen situations whereby in Africa, the military, all that they need to do is able to take up maybe a public broadcasting corporation, right? If it's in Ghana, you just take over GBC. If it's in Sierra Leone, you take over, and then you make your announcement that you've taken over power. All right, so before we proceed with today's discussion, we want our listeners to know that this program is for educational, information, and operational purposes for policymakers in state houses, either in the US or in Africa, to find common grounds, right, in terms of partnership to address the numerous challenges facing the African continent, whether internally or externally, right? We want policymakers in state houses on the African continent in the US to note that the Sankofa African webinar is anchored on a myriad of perspectives. So there may be differences in terms of opinions from our guests based on their expertise, knowledge, and experiences. The difference in opinions do not necessarily mean perspectives and thoughts shared are wrong, but reflect a divergence of ideas to address security challenges on the continent, right? And also, the program, like I said, is an open discussion program where we use narratives, right? Some people ask what narratives. So narratives is premised on the term Sankofa, right? Which is employed by Pan-Africanists all over the world to promote the notion that African people must go back to their roots to find what works in the past and weave them into the present in order to move forward, right? So these narratives are actually contextualized based on the topics, right? And we want our guests to look at it from the perspective of great powers' strategic relations with the continent. But in this case, since we are dealing with the US, we want them to look at it from the perspective of the US policy and strategy towards Africa in terms of defense, diplomacy, and what? Development. So to help us delve into the topic for today are some familiar faces and not so familiar faces, right? People with military backgrounds and people coming from academia and people who with legal backgrounds. So our panelists for today are Lieutenant Ted Corker, right? He's a retired Army officer, a senior security reform consultant, and a former DOD Director of Policy for Africa, right? Dr. Andrews Atasamoah is the head of program, African Peace and Security Governance at the Institute for Security Studies. He's currently joining us from what? Pretoria, South Africa, right? He's had so much encounter with the AU, so we'll count on his experiences going forward on this thing. Then we have Dr. Welemera, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the College of Law, University of South Africa, Entebbe, Uganda. Now, I was very fascinated about a piece, an article that he published on academia. So I took my time and I read the article and I was like, oh, this is so fascinating. So let me see what I can get in touch with him for him to join us today. And luckily, he's here with us. And also I have with me, I think the youngest among all of us, right? Captain Kwesi Arthur Barnes, who is an active military officer in the Ghana military, right? He considers himself to be a defense and security, counterterrorism, international relations, peace building, and conflict resolution analyst. He's joining us from Accra, right? He also presented some thoughts also on LinkedIn in terms of an article that I read. And I was like, a military officer talking about this thing. So let's see what he has. Since he's so young among all of us, so maybe he has different perspective, which may be different from some of the old ones, right? Who are on the panel. And we are lucky to have a very good friend of mine, right? A senior from high school at the Sada College. He's a lawyer. He's been working with, he has so much experience in what? The legal system in Ghana. We have Cecil Adadevo. He's also going to join us. And he not only be an observer, but make his contributions based on issues that we are going to talk about and also present his legal opinion on some of the issues that we are going to deal with. So gentlemen, it's an honor to have all of you for this panel discussion. Right, before I continue to let you have your opening remarks, right? I want our listeners to know that this program is actually brought by kind courtesy of what? Bell & Associate Consulting and Budget IT. So I want all of you to take a break, take a 2 minutes break, right? Relax, and let's get a promotional video from Bell & Associate Consulting. And when we come back, right, I'll get your opening remarks before we delve into the topic. So, Nancy, if you are ready, you can play the video whilst our guest takes some 2 minutes break and reflect about what the program is all about as we proceed. So, Nancy, go ahead. Nancy, can you hear me? Can you go ahead and play the promotional video whilst our panelists relax and Thank you very much, Nancy, for the good job done. I think this is the first time you're doing this, right? So you always have to be on the lookout for me calling you. All right. So welcome back, gentlemen. So let's begin with a welcome address. Let's start with Dr. Andrews Atasamoah, who is joining us from South Africa. Unmute your speaker, right?
Thanks, Prof, for this convening and the topic we are discussing. So I want to focus my introductory remarks on, the coup trends we are having now. If you look closely, we are in one of the most intense moments of coup encounters on the continent. Of course, from 1952 all the way till now, you can count close to 100 successful coups, right? But I think if you look closely, the reason for saying we are in one of the most intense periods is if you look at the aggregation of the coups per decade across this period from 1952 until now. If you look closely, we've had about 8 cases of successful coups from 2021 to 2023. Think of it as 3-year period, right? 8 coups. That is equivalent to the number of coups we had between 2011 to 2020, that decade. So that tells you how intense and compressed this period has been. And that is about half of all the coups we experienced between 1981 to 1990, which was also a very intense coup period. And so that tells you that as we speak, in terms of intensity of successful coups, we are in one of a coup wave. It's essentially a third coup wave. If you look at the 60s and the 90s period as critical peaks in the whole conversation on coups. Now, and so the whole conversation about the search for why is coming out in various ways. And as much as we try to draw the parallels, I think we shouldn't look beyond 3 variables. One is the state and the nature of the governance systems we've chosen to grow on the continent, and whether they are delivering the expectations of the common people on the streets. And I'm talking about the democratic trends, right? And the functionality of the state, because we have states legally represented so, but the functional relevance of the state is increasingly coming under question. And so we are seeing these becoming the drivers, or at least the reasons cited as such by coup makers. You can doubt what they say, but that also explains why we see a lot of jubilation in some of the places when coups happen. The second variable is to look at how we've treated the army, or how we've managed our armies in post-conflict situations, whether the SSR situation, or how our armies, the management of the relation between the armies and the civilian infrastructure has also been. We've seen deliberate attempts to sort of try to coup-proof certain countries by either under-equipping the army and using structures that are paramilitary and over-equipping them in a certain way that makes them almost the ones that have access to the presidency, and that have come with issues that we can unpack later. And the third variable really has to do with the emerging tendency of the so-called democratic leaders, civilians, so seen, but who are having autocratic tendencies. And we can give countries where all of these are also happening. So from where I sit, these are 3 variables that are dictating the dynamics that play. Of course, there are other layers that other actors throw into the equation, but I will consider those as outer layer variables that inform issues that sit at the core. These define how the coups are playing out now. And so the discussions and the nuances that come, I think we'll be able to unpack the trend of the data and the dynamics around it, as I've unpacked in my introduction. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Seems like you are more or less setting the stage already for what is supposed to follow. Let's go to Lieutenant Ted Corker. All right, your opening remarks.
Good. Hello and welcome to everyone. It's once again a pleasure and honor to be with you. And I have to make sure that just to note that I'm not in an official capacity, and so this is a non-attribution statement that I don't currently represent the U.S. government, even though I am a longstanding member of the U.S. government, but just a statement there. In terms of Dr. Asamoah, I would add on to that because I appreciate the variables that he's already kind of tabled up, and I'm sure, as you said, you will address them as well. But Dr. Asamoah, I would add to that, to what you said, and to your three variables. I would, and in the context of what Dr. Quay had said about the whole purpose of the series and superpower to D3, is that if you take the Dr. Asamoah's remarks and then you overlay on top of that the superpower influence, then see how all that fits into the mix. And so that may be for conversation later, but I think that's a factor to it, and may also kind of provide some lead into why you have this intense and compressed coups in an abbreviated period of time. I try to underscore again, take care of this D3, because it is what it says it is. It's D3, defense, diplomacy, and development. It is not Homeland Security. It is not, you were talking about Posse Comitatus, and it's not about sheriffs and posses. It's about the U.S. military. It's about the defense establishment kind of coming to bear, rather than public and civil tools to be able to kind of address the situation. But without further ado, I'll thank you again, welcome, and I look forward to the conversation.
Right, thank you very much. Let's go to Captain Kwesi from Ghana. We want your opening remarks. You are a military man, so it seems like you are going to be on. You are an active military man, so it seems like the lens is on you. All right, so let's get your opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? I had to join from my phone.
Sure, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, so considering the topic under discussion, I also think that it is very sensitive. It is very sensitive in the sense that the spate of military coup d'etats within the Sahel, and by extension West Africa, and then extending to Ghana, is quite alarming. Nobody ideally would want to see military takeover of governments, but quite unfortunately, it is happening. We may want to attribute some of these things to economic challenges, civil sentiments, and all that. But then let me link it to Posse Comitatus, in the sense that the military is being used as a law enforcement tool to help enforce law and order in most countries. Of course, in the US and in the UK, it doesn't happen. But in countries like Ghana, you see some of these things happening because of the kind of system we run. Our budgets or our economy is large enough to have a force such as the Department of Homeland Security. Can we maintain a vibrant police force and equip them so well, such that they are not involving themselves, such that the military is not being used as a law enforcement agency? With the current threat of terrorism, which is extending through into our borders, we may want to ask ourselves, should we use the police to conduct counterterrorism operations, or is the military needed? Before then, are we targeting anti-terrorism or counterterrorism? And in the context of anti-terrorism, which actually opens our minds or brings our minds to a broader perspective, what aspects of security are we using, or are we considering? Are we waiting for issues to escalate? Now, when they escalate, obviously there has to be some form of military action. Does that justify the need to use the military to ensure law enforcement, or does that justify the need to use the military to conduct counterterrorism operations. These are some of the things that I think we should be looking at in the discussion we'll be having.
Sure. We're definitely going to get all these things, and we're going to get your take on that, because we have two lawyers also on the panel today. So can we go to you, Dr. Dala Willimara? Can we go to you, being a lawyer, your opening remarks, taking into consideration what Captain Kwesi just said?
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, maybe let me start with that. So there should be a separation of roles between the military and the police. And the military should only be called in to law and order functions in exceptional circumstances. Exceptional circumstances. Obviously, those exceptional circumstances may range from terrorism to drugs or a natural disaster that may happen and requires a rapid response to restore order, that kind of thing. Beyond those few exceptions, on the African continent, you are seeing that actually the military is supplanting the role of the police, and it is now performing the law and order functions. What does that do? It then removes the military from its core function of guarding the territorial integrity of the state, but it also then creates a gap there. If you've moved troops from what their actual function is, what their major function is, and gotten them into law and order duties, you're then leaving a gap. That's one. Two, once you move them to the law and order function, you are moving human resource to a law and order function that is not trained for that law and order function. Consequently, it will lead to coups, as you're saying. It will lead to violation of human rights. It will lead to extrajudicial executions and killings. It will lead to all sorts of all manner of violation of civil liberties. So I only accept that the military should come in because it has certain advantages. It's quick to respond to things like national disasters. It's quick to respond to things like terrorism. But once the situation has normalized, those people should go back to their core function, which is...
All right, so thank you. We'll get into details about your opening remarks, right? Because if you look at African constitutions, right, they have a role that the military has to play in the constitutions, and sometimes the president uses his own authority to try to get them to do certain things. Right? Let's get an opening remarks from my good friend, right, from Ghana also, right, Mr. Cecil Adadiwo. Do you have anything opening remarks before we delve into what we are supposed to discuss today?
Thank you. Is it Benjamin, right?
Correct, yeah.
Yes, it's been a long time, right, about 20 years since we last met, almost 30 years. 30 years, right.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this meeting. And I think that I'm in good company, eminent people who are well-versed in their subject area. I am a chief state attorney, but I don't speak for the government of Ghana. These views are my private views, and they have nothing to do with the government or administration's thinking. I want to look at the whole issue from the systemic point of view, in the sense that we need to ask ourselves how we came by democracy in Africa from the 90s to this period. It was economic. The Bretton Woods institutions made a point to say that you cannot get economic assistance unless you democratize. That's one. Then the other issue is that if after we've democratized, is there legitimacy? Is the political system satisfactory to everybody? That is, the elections we have, the things that take place, the monetization and all those things that take place, is a system legitimate? Then the other issue is economic also. If people are not having economic dividend from democratic rule or constitutional rule, then of course, the military's role in coming into government comes into play. But I just want to say that I listened to Dr. Asamoah, and I said that he made a point that some countries underutilize the military and they reinforce paramilitary organizations to avoid coups. But I just want to draw the meeting's attention to the fact that the coups in Niger and in Gabon, the coups emanated from the Presidential Guard. Now, these Presidential Guard are elite forces, well armed to prevent the regular army from interfering politically. So it looks like systemic-wise, those who are to prevent coup d'etats from happening have suddenly found that they are the ones who are in the best position to take over the arms of government. I think that we need to look at it in the broad scope of economic difficulty for the majority of Africans, in the sense that the world is going through economic turmoil. The World Bank, the IMF, they all talk about slow growth, resilience, and inflation coming down and all that. But for the average African, we are hard hit. And more people are going to go into the poverty scale or the poverty line. So it begs the question, are we having democracy for the sake of having it? Are we abusing the process and making a fun of the legitimacy of the process? And are we delivering development to our people? So these are the thoughts I think that as the discussion goes on, we can look at. Thank you, Benjamin.
Yeah, he's wearing a legal cap, but he's now venturing into areas of politics, right? That's very interesting. Right, so let's continue. Right, so gentlemen, I think I sent you a document, right, which talks about the Biden administration, strategy towards sub-Saharan Africa, which was espoused last year, August, in 2022. I want to read excerpts of that document, then we'll go into our narratives, right? So the document continues, let me read very quickly. The Biden administration in August 2022 presented its US strategy towards sub-Saharan Africa. Parts of the strategic document state this strategy reframes the sub-Saharan region's importance to US national security interests. So sub-Saharan Africa is considered very, very vital to US interests. The strategy, the document continues, is anchored on 4 objectives: to advance US priorities in concert with regional powers in sub-Saharan Africa for the next 5 years. The strategy was for the US to leverage all of its diplomatic, development, and defense capabilities, as well as strengthen trade and commercial ties, with a focus on digital ecosystems and rebalance towards urban hubs to support these objectives. So they came up with 4 different objectives: foster openness and open societies, deliver democratic and security dividends, advance pandemic recovery and economic opportunity, and 4, support conservatism, climate adaptation, and just energy transition. So today, we are going to focus our attention on the second one, which has to do with deliver democratic and security dividends. That is very interesting to our conversation with respect to democracy, consolidation, and military takeover. Now, I'm now going to create my narrative. Now, on April 9, 2008, Uganda circulated a draft document to the African Union Council members that addresses the recent resurgence of coup d'etats in Africa. The purpose was to support the AU decision of February 3, 2008 on the resurgence of coups in Africa. The AU decision expressed concern about the resurgence of coups and condemned those that took place in Mauritania in August 2008 and in Guinea in December 2008, and the attempted coup in Guinea-Bissau in December 2008. Now, since 2008, there are estimates of about 50 coups and 50 attempted on the African continent, with the recent one being what happened in Sierra Leone on November 26th. Now, the Biden administration, as part of its 2022 strategy towards Africa, emphasized that the US will prioritize counterterrorism to reduce the threats from terrorist groups to the homeland, persons, and diplomatic and military facilities, directing unilateral capability only where lawful and where the threat is most acute. Portions of the document read, we will primarily work by, with, and through African partners in coordination with other key allies on bilateral and multilateral basis to achieve shared CT counterterrorism objectives and promote civilian-led non-kinetic approaches where possible and effective. As part of this approach, we will employ tailored programs to build the capacity of local partners, security agencies, intelligence, and judicial institutions to identify, disrupt, degrade, and share information on terrorists and their support net groups. Now, there is a school of thought that holds the view that US approach of building local partners to disrupt, degrade terrorists and support their networks have been focused predominantly on the military at the expense of law enforcement and intelligence agencies. There are other scholars and experts who make the assertion that US military assertiveness in its fight against terrorism, counterterrorism, and CVE policies in the Sahel and the CWA regions have played a part or continue to play a part in coups on the African continent. So my question to you first, Dr. Samoa, as an expert with vast experience on the security challenges of Africa, and also as a program head, Africa Peace and Security Governance at IASS, coordinating programs and policies with the AU, what will you consider to be some of the driving forces or explanatory variables that explain the absence of coups on the continent, especially on the Sahel and CW region areas?
Thank you very much, and thanks for a very elaborate, reading of actually preamble to this question. So in my introductory remarks, I gave about 3 of them. I touched on what is emerging as dictatorial tendencies on the part of some people who are supposed to be Democrats in a sense, on the civilian part. But in a broader form, apart from the dictatorial tendencies that we are seeing in some countries, you can also talk about the fact that there's usually, you find governments that are supposed to be democratic using military means to clamp down, trying to stifle dissent or to close the political space, right? We've seen that manifesting. We've also seen, as I indicated, a thawing of relations between the civilian political elite and in some countries, the military elite. And associated with that is the failure of security sector reforms and sometimes the actual abuse of the privilege that civilians have to have oversight over the military. I think in one of these countries, Ghana, the last election, you remember very well how some military elements were called into the parliament. Outright disregard for whatever the provisions would be. And I want to believe that that call was made by a civilian politician who thought the country was becoming ungovernable at the time. So we are seeing part of that. And then the broader failure, as I indicated, of the state, right? Legally, the states exist, but functionally, the states, many of the states do not go beyond the capital, and sometimes at best, the seat of government, the presidential palaces. And this is becoming increasingly very real. But if you look at the broader conversation in the West African sub-region, you realize also that there's an increasing connection between the demand for more security, right, in countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and the failures of the governments in power to deliver that and the onset of coups. So there's emerging a certain narrative around we need security, and if you can't provide, then those who have what it takes to provide the security coming into power. So these are new dynamics. add on that the unemployment variables, add on that all the other variables that are creating weak statehood that we have on the African continent. And again, let me elaborate this because this will provide a very good segue for some of the conversation we will have when you bring in the international dimension. You have those who are arguing that foreign capacitation of the military against over and above, the strength of other institutions creates more of an imbalance, which causes, coups. And this is where it comes in. Weak state structures that we are seeing, and state structures that are not strong enough to provide the anchor around which state citizens can rally around, always create a distancing of citizens away and away from the state. And I am not surprised that sometimes when certain leaders are sent out through military coups, people go to the streets. I mean, the caution we need to draw is that it's not necessarily always to welcome the coups. It's sometimes about seeing the back of the big man who is exiting. So these are some of the complexities. So if you ask me, in addition to the three, I would say that we need to look closely also at the worsening of security relations, security trends in some of the countries, Burkina Faso being one, Mali being another, right? But then I would need to then acknowledge the point you made about the US's, well, not the US, but because I can broaden that conversation much more broadly beyond the US. Those who seem to impugn a certain element of blame on big powers that train, military officers and what becomes of them, all right? And in West Africa, a lot of blame has been put on the involvement of military, certain militaries in countries like
that will be my next question. That will be my next question.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay,
so if we want to look at the causes, these are the trends, the states, the relations, the actions of the civilian elite, right? The failures of the state to be relevant in the lives of citizens, and a whole range of associated effects.
All right, thank you very much. Now, in your submission, you brought up the concept of democracy, right? Now, Mr. Adadebo was also making the argument that democracy in Africa was as a result of economic reasons, whereby the World Bank, right, had to force some of these African countries, right, to move towards democratization. So basically, democracy is from below down, but democracy in actual fact should be bottom up in terms of the individuals, family, communities, all the way up. So we have it the reverse. Mr. Adadebo, will you agree with that assertion that the way democracy is structured in Africa is top down instead of it should be rather be bottom up? People, the legitimacy should come from the people, right? But we now derive our legitimacy from the people who are rather at the top. What would you say to that instead of the economic reasons that you initially?
The economic reason is just one of the reasons. Actually, when the military are in power for a long time, fatigue sets in the population because military rule is like state of emergency period, where human rights are suspended, where the rights of liberty and all those things are circumscribed. So the people become fatigued with military rule after some time. So they really call for a civilian or constitutional rule. But the real pressure on the military rulers to relinquish power is economic because the development partners and the Bretton Woods usually say that you don't get aid until you hand over or you transform yourself. So the people themselves yearn for democratic rule, which gives them or guarantees their freedoms and their rights. At least speaking for Ghana, I can say that the people yearn for it. But the problem that comes after that is that the participation in the process and how to get elected, how to form a government and all creates legitimacy problems because the process is monetized. So if you don't have money, you don't have significant money or financial backers, you cannot participate in the process. Now the process also is flawed because the processes that lead to the election or the declaration of the elections are flawed in some aspects, security-wise, sometimes even the materials used in elections and the rest. Because at least we have 2 petitions in Ghana, election petitions in Ghana, where the losing party went to court to challenge the electoral process. In all the 2 instances or the 2 occasions, they were unsuccessful. But at least what we had was that there was a resort to the judiciary to determine the legitimacy of the process. So the legitimacy of the process is an issue also we need to look at. And if I want to talk about Ghana, for instance, I think what the constitutional or democratic governments have done is to emphasize peacekeeping for our troops. So now it is very common for a peacekeeper to find himself in Somalia or find himself in South Sudan or find himself in Mali or some other place, because it's part of the arrangement so that the military is not idle. They are occupied with peacekeeping activities around the world, which financially too is in some sense is beneficial to them because they can get the basic things that they require to have a satisfactory life. But for me, looking at the US influence in Africa, I think that for me it's very sad that the posture of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso is to jettison France. Anything French is jettisoned, and they are resorting to these Russian mercenaries called Wagner. So that is a very sad thing for me. In fact, when I saw the program of the withdrawal of the United Nations troops, that was the final nail in the coffin. And I'm wondering how they are going to address the jihadist problem, because France had put its troops, its equipment, its resources to fight the jihadists. But I think that some of the things that happen in Africa are also ad hoc. We've not really thought about the question, why the jihadists? The jihadists is because there's a group of nomads in the northern Mali region, northern Mali and Burkina Faso region, known as Tuaregs. And these Tuaregs were absorbed into the Libyan army.
We'll come to that, right? I want us to still stick with the 2 of you brought up the issue of democracy, right? Which is very, very important to me. So let me go to the to Daniel. He's also a lawyer, right? Now, the argument that I'm making in terms of what democracy, we want to go back and look at some of the foundational challenges that Africa has right from the get-go when it comes to democracy, right? Mr. Dedemo was saying that, okay, Africans were forced to accept democracy for economic reasons. And we are trying to look at the foundational issue. Democracy should come from below, right? Democracy, if you go back to from the Greeks, we the people. So democracy is normally coming from the individual level, right? Then you go to the family, then you go to the community before you go to the state, right? So that is the way it should come. It should be bottom up. But what we have in Africa is actually up. For example, in the United States, if you want to run for presidency, you have to go to the people, right, to solicit funds from them for your elections. But in Africa, when you are running for elections, right, you rather go to the people and collect money from them, which is the reverse. In the US, it is the public that fund, right?
You may give them money.
The political actors. But in Africa, it is the other way around. So my question is, isn't that we have a foundational problem in terms of the way we look at democracy in itself? Yeah. Dr. Willemara, let's hear from you. Don't you think we have a foundational problem right from the get-go?
Okay.
Because it should be bottom down and not what? Yeah, so go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think the other question that you should be asking is whether on the African continent, democracy is democratic. because that's the issue you're grappling with, is the bottom down and top bottom. You see, if you look at the origins of democracy, this is an Anglo-American, European culture or ways of organizing their society that is then exported forcefully onto the African continent. Now, in the pre-colonial times, do you have democracy in Africa? Before these people who want your resources, these people who have come for economic reasons, like my senior colleague there, the lawyer from Ghana is saying, do you have democracy in the pre-colonial times on the African continent? So that when this Anglo-American stroke European form of life or form of organizing society is imposed you forcefully, you are then able to assimilate it into your culture. That's the beginning. It's not about top, bottom. The beginning is you're being forced to adopt to democracy, a form of democracy that is not in your culture. So in the pre-colonial times, you have chiefdoms, you have clan systems, you have elder systems, you have kingdoms. Are those governance structures in the pre-colonial times democratic? If they are not democratic, then that means that the Greek democracy, the European democracy, the Anglo-American democracy that is imposed to you then finds dictators who are already available to just adopt to their former dictatorial, their dictatorial ways that were with them already. And they are now, you've imposed on them a foreign culture called democracy, which democracy they will not abide by. Look at the elections in Africa. There is a lot of scholarship on the selection and not election of leaders on the African continent. The selection. So the so-called periodic elections to enable a representative democracy in many of the African states is simply a farce. It is very comical for it to be called democracy. Why? As I've told you, the initial context is that you're imposing a culture that is foreign on people who may be otherwise not have been democratic. And the leaders that you've found are taking on this culture and then continuing with the dictatorship. But pretending actually that they have adopted to this new culture called democracy. Because if you look at our elections, apart from one or two countries, there are no elections on the African continent. There are only selections. Perhaps what Karl Marx says about the ruling ideas. If people get the monopoly to violence, if they have this equipment, they have these guns, then they can pose around in the sense that they are being democratic, but actually they are not holding that power democratically. They are using the equipment, they are using the monopoly to violence to hold on to power. That's the very reason why you see that you have leaders who have been in power for 40 years, for 50 years. When there are documents, African Union documents, talking about term limits, what is the African Union saying about the very documents that they have shown to protect about term limits? In many countries, you're seeing the military, like my senior colleague in Ghana said, enter the parliament to ensure that a constitution is changed or the term limits that have been put in place in the constitution to enable somebody, president, leave power, to ensure that the parliamentarians pass this constitutional amendment. In Uganda, we've had it. The military and the special forces entered the parliament, beat up members of parliament. Some got so many injuries until these term limits were lifted. And those in this borrowed democracy of ours from Europe, those are what you'd call entrenched provisions that would then enable an African country to have democracy, which would then, as a consequence, in some sense, limit the amount of coups that you have, because you have less discontentment when you have a frequent change of leaders within a particular country. If you've had a leader for 40 years, for 35 years, for 45 years, and after that leader leaves, he's grooming the son to take over for another 30 years. What do you expect? Not only not only the military, not only the poor people, citizens, the popular citizens that you're talking about, the people who are on the ground, what do you expect them to do? To continue to allow this kingdom that is disguising itself as a democracy to continue? Obviously, the military will step in. The citizens, popular uprisings will happen, even if it's not the military that has taken that course. Even the foreign powers that also want to have some influence in that country will sponsor the coup. So, and you want to obviously have coups in the continent.
All right, thank you very much. Right, I'll look at the international aspect with Lieutenant Tadkoka and Kwesi, but let me go back to Dr. Andy. Do you agree that the democracy that we have in Africa is flawed? Because there's a lot of scholarship out over there which says what? Democracy from below, not democracy from above. Right. So it seems like even though democracy should be actually from the people, right? Democracy is actually seen from the top, right? That is why Mr. Walimara is saying that it is a selection and not an election. Should democracy be from below or from above?
No, I think first of all, it's not clear-cut, right? You have different health of the different democracies that we have across the continent. I think one of the key things we need to interrogate intellectually is, to what extent are we still calling, are we still calling democracies in Africa alien after all these years of practice, right? It may not have matured the way it has matured elsewhere because they have had it for hundreds of years.
Okay.
But you will agree with me that we are not where we were in 1990, for instance. And so it's an organic process. You will have all the failures of an infant democracy because state building is a process. And state building in Africa is an unfinished business. It will keep going on. The challenges that we will face, given where we are, is totally different from us planting ourselves next to that of the US or others and measuring our systems by theirs, because that is what we see and aspire to be. We need to give room for our countries to organically grow, strengthen. And that means that you are not going to be perfect from day one. We need to trust the process. But what we really need to guarantee the process is political consensus to say that regardless of the challenges we face, there are certain trajectories which we shouldn't go. We shouldn't get into the army. You may insult yourselves all you want, as they do in Ghana and other places. But at the end of the day, it is democracy we've chosen to go by, and that is where we need to stay and stay within the confines of that. So I feel that it's a mix of these experiences. We cannot throw all the experiences out with the bathwater and say it's completely, I don't know how I've forgotten how you crafted it to provoke me, but it's essentially that we need to trust the process, right? We will have missteps, but let's sustain what we have, because we can only add to the progress to take us where we need to be. And that is why I have had so much issues with those who are arguing that because the democracies are failing, the army, the coups are getting justified. Because those of us who have grown up in Ghana, we know how long it takes to really do away with military influence in politics. Sometimes it takes the whole generation. And even that, the influence they leave is very difficult to, to do away with. So I feel it's mixed. Even in some of these cases, right? Take, for example, politicians in some countries going to the grassroots, to the chiefs, the traditional leaders, to ask for their endorsement, right? Going rally to rally. Of course, you can problematize the whole aspect of giving out, but there's also an element of appreciating the fact that the power lies with the people. So these are indications of good elements which we need to preserve. But we can only preserve if we accept that this is how we've chosen to live our lives, and accept the fact that the organic evolution of the African state was truncated. We adopted something, yes, we accept that, but we cannot for donkey years continue to say it's alien, because we've been in it for several years, and the earlier we focus on it and move with it, the better for us. And that is the state where we are. We need to accept the fact that this is now part of us. It is our new adopted way of governing ourselves, and we need to fix it as we go, trusting the process.
You made a very interesting point where you say what African leaders, Africans have chosen, that's the system they have chosen, right? Now, let me backtrack a little bit. Let me go to Mr. Adadevo. I'll leave the international aspect for the two military officers, right? I want to come back to you. Do you think Africa, in the United States, for example, right, we can say that American people have chosen democracy as the only form of political system that they want to live with. In Africa, do you think that Africans have chosen democracy, even though in the back of their mind, they recognize military regime as an alternative? Because anytime there's a military takeover, there are dances on the street of Accra, dances on the street of Niger, Burkina Faso. So how do you make the argument that Africans have chosen the democracy as the political system when they are still dancing and singing and praising to military leaders? How do you make that distinction that they have chosen? Chosen means what? There's no alternative.
Well, thank you. I've listened to Dr. Asabwa, and I think that listening to Dr. Asabwa, if you want to use Ghana as an example, we've been democratic for at least 30 years, which is a lifetime for the young generation. Some are not even up to 30, so they've not really experienced any other form of government other than democratic rule. But what we are saying is that democracy is not alien to Africa, but there are teething problems like ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is such that in some countries, if we were to make an example, like Kenya and Zimbabwe, the minority group, there's no way they can ever rule that country, because if you go to the election, the majority group has the numbers. So you go to Kenya, the same, you go to Zimbabwe, the same. So ethnocentrism is a difficulty, a challenge we are faced with when it comes to democratic rule. Then when they come into government, the conduct of the government, democratic government, for the people, where there's perception of corruption and abuse of office, it makes it difficult to sell democracy to the hearts and soul of Africans.
Let me interrupt and stick with you in Ghana, right? Recently, when there were economic challenges in terms of corruption and all these things, there were people in the media, there were people in various sectors of the Ghanaian economy who wanted a coup d'etat to happen. There were people in the media. Actually, how do you make a choice? If you make a choice that I've set a democracy, why are you calling for the military to take over if you made a choice?
You see, the issue with democratic rule is that there are very variants. We are practicing the American system where one party comes into government and sweeps everything under its carpet. So when there's frustration, in the economic frustration and coupled with corruption, then the other option for the weaker party is to seek to bring the military in to stabilize the situation. But people have argued that is the military necessarily a good answer to that challenge? So we have ethnocentrism, we have corruption, we have difficulties, economic challenges for the people. And we think that it's not only the democratic government, but also the judiciary who hold the scale of balance between the ordinary Ghanaian and the other African and his colleague, and also between the African and the government, its relations with the people. So if the judiciary is also perceived to be independent, fair, and impartial, then it helps the democratic process. But I just want to tell Dr. Asamoah that in some countries, ethnocentrism is so real that where you are born in that country will determine whether you ever hold public office in that country. Thank you.
All right, so we've had I want us to go back and look at the international aspect, because I'm still of the opinion that if you choose a political system, which is democracy, irrespective of what happens in democracy, right, military regime should not be an alternative. Because if you see military regime as an alternative, it means it is either or, but it should be just one aspect. All right, so let me go to the international aspect of it. Lieutenant Corker, as a military officer with over 20 years experience, and you have had over 30 years experience living on the African continent and directing DoD policy towards Africa, right? Do you agree with the assertion made by some African coup experts and scholars that despite African state security and defense challenges, as the various panelists are making, U.S. military assertiveness through its counterinsurgency policies in the sub-Saharan Africa, especially the Sahel and the CWI since 2003, have contributed to some of these resurgent coup phenomena? You can go back and have a summary of what you have already discussed before you go back, you address your own question.
The question is the U.S. aspect of this?
Correct. There's U.S. aspect of it.
Okay.
Like I said, you can go back and try to
many
things that you're saying, right?
Many things come to mind. so I will start with I think what you said earlier, Dr. Kwai, and you were talking about a demand for security and a provision and so forth. When I have and that's the demand for security is part of the motivation or behind why some of these military leaders go the route of the coup. And when I look for particularly specifically in the Sahel, the demand for security, and with the current threat, with counterterrorism, I see that the military forces were doing their what they thought was their best to prosecute the threat. And so in Burkina Faso, there was a tremendous CT effort, and in the other countries, Niger and Mali and the like. I think what I have not heard is that as they were doing that, what many may not understand is the extent to which they were or were not supported by their government or civilian authorities in those countries. And it's my opinion that many of the military felt as though that they did not have the proper the proper attention of the civilian to adequately and sufficiently address the threat, for one. Now on that, and then with the provision and part of the international aspect then is who they were partnered with at the time. And so all the countries were partnered with who? What country? France. And so even so they were partnered with France primarily. France was on the ground and involved, but they were also partnered with the U.S. And so the U.S. had a major, massive defense institution building effort during that period. Now, on one side, one support comes with conditions, the other side doesn't come with conditions. In my assessment, the French interaction with the countries came with conditions, and the conditions were those that many of the military leaders took exception to. And that then the rest is history in terms of the France losing its credibility, and not only its credibility, but it's also its welcomeness in the country. And so many so the French president has been pushed out. Now again, that does not lend legitimacy to the coups. It's just a part of the nature of the beast. It came to a head, and that's where you have many of the coups in a compressed amount of time, and for part of the reasons. Number two, I would talk here. I would we're here where I would come in with your also your remarks about Posse Comitatus. And so Posse Comitatus is in the U.S. context, you know,
okay,
Posse.
we'll address that in our next narrative. Great, go ahead. So go ahead.
I will, but it is. I do need to kind of mention that the it is not the Posse, U.S. Posse Comitatus Act.
Correct. 1878
specifically prohibits the use of the U.S. military in the continental United States. Period. And so you'll talk about that later.
Sure.
But
yeah.
it is where there's comments about, and I appreciate Dr. Asamoah talking about ongoing state building. You know, what do people want? Political consensus and respecting the process and letting the process play out. But I do think that also connects back to the other the commentators' remark about the pre-colonial Africa. And I think even though we want to think in terms of tribes and chiefdoms and elders and that like, my impression of that is that those tribes, chiefdoms and elders, it really is the basis for a democracy. And so, you know, where you have an executive or leadership, you have people kind of making rules, and then you also have people taking care of the economy. So I just think, you know, this new term, democracy, it may be a repackage of how, you know, societies lived for a long time. And on that, it's also in the reference to it being Anglophone. You know, the U.S. democracy is a hybrid of what they got received from the UK, but it's also a you know, part of what it received from Native Americans. And so it was those two forces that converged to do what? To produce the U.S. Constitution. And so many of the leaders, you know, again, they were they lived clearly in close contact with the Native Americans, even though they were slaughtered over time. Nevertheless, a lot of the things that the Native Americans had been here, organized, been in their chiefdoms and so forth for a long time before the land mass was colonized, if you will. But then again, those traditions, those oral traditions were incorporated and written form in our publications like the Constitution. So they have I would again. So that I will stop there.
Okay. All right. So let me come to you, Captain Barnes. Right. No. So you have been trained by either probably the French or probably the United States Army in terms of equipping you to fight terrorism and other violent extremism. Right. Don't you think that all these sort of trainings, right, makes the military stronger than civil society, and it makes cool the hanging fruit for some of you who are in the military to take over when there's economic instability or political instability?
Okay, thank you very much. So I would first of all want to address this question by saying that the training or not regardless, once the military is equipped, it gives them some sort of strength over their civilian counterparts. Let me continue by also saying that coups are democratically unjustified for whatever reason. And insofar as we as a country have accepted to go with the democracy, then there is no way we should have coup attempts within the country for whatever reason. I mean, the power should lie within the people, but of course, you may see some sort of authoritarianism, I mean, being practiced. And I remember you mentioned the democracy is supposed to be a bottom-up approach, not a top-down approach. But sometimes within so many African countries, you see the top-down approach being employed, where the democratically elected leaders have so much power. Now, let me come directly to the question you just asked. First of all, the US has interest in Africa. And per the document you sent, it's spelled out clearly. that they have so much interest. They want to push minority groups such as the LGBTQI to empower them. They want to ensure that there's that enabling environment where they can conduct their trade, free trade for that matter. And so in doing that, if they've identified terrorism as an avenue which will cause a state of insecurity in the countries where they have their interests, then it's going to defeat the purpose of them wanting to come into those countries and then probably invest and then pursue the resources that they want. Now, in this case, they may resort to having to partner with the African militaries, for which reason Ghana has a partnership with the United States Army. We conduct two counterterrorism exercises. One is a exercise African Lion. I think for this year, it's going to be held, I think, in May. We also have exercise Flintlock. All these are counterterrorism-based exercises, which is basically conducted to equip countries such as Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, Togo, and then countries within that general region to boost our readiness to combat terrorism. It may have directly or indirectly contributed to the empowerment of the military to want to, to want to stage coups. That is when there are problems within the country. Obviously, for me, I'll just mention some 3 basic reasons as the causes of coups. When there are local grievances among the civilian population, when probably there are ethnic tensions. In Ghana specifically, a case in point is Boko. 2 days ago, I don't know if you've been following the news.
Sure, yeah.
But there were clashes, yes, there were clashes in Boko where the locals started shooting at each other, and then the military had to go and intervene. Quite unfortunately, there were 3 deaths that were recorded. There are so many agitations that the government is empowering the military to support one party, which is a problem. So in this case, it is quite difficult to separate politics from the military. So if you have some of our military leaders who don't really understand the concept of democracy, bind into one political faction, obviously you have other military leaders who also support the minority group, and they may disagree to what, let's just say, a typical example, we have the chief of the defense staff, who, let's say, has been appointed by the government, and so is sympathetic to his cause. We have other sub-military leaders who may also be part of the minority group and may think that whatever measures being employed by the chief of the defense staff are not in tune with the democratic values, and so may want to resort to coup d'etats. And this is basically a misunderstanding or a lacking of a comprehensive understanding of what the democratic system is. And so in wanting to empower himself and wanting to please the people, he may resort to a coup d'etat. And then what does that happen? If it's a bloody coup, obviously the CDS and then all the people in a circle are eliminated or otherwise. So basically, the training of African armies by the US may have directly or indirectly contributed to the coup d'etat. Not necessarily for Ghana, because I think that for Ghana, it's been explicitly said by the military hierarchy, the military high command has stated that there is no interest in coup d'etats. We are still going to uphold the democratic values. I would want to end by saying that I also feel that we haven't practiced democracy for too long. I think one of the panelists mentioned that we practice democracy for about 30 years, and in this 30 years is enough for the younger generation who have not met any form of governance. However, we should also bear in mind the fact that those who were born into democracy have seen the democratic systems established by the older generation and how they practice it. And so if I'm a 25-year-old person that has been born into a democratic system of governance in Ghana, and then I see how the democracy is being practiced, I think that becomes the status quo for me. I think that becomes the norm. And so if I'm even also supposed to enter into politics, I'm going to practice it the way I saw it being practiced. And that becomes a problem. So for Ghana, as a case in point, I think that we are unlikely to see some of these coup d'etats happen because they are unjustified and we believe in the democratic principles. However, the US training of African armies or African militaries may not have directly contributed to a resurgence of coups in Africa. It may have done that indirectly by equipping them and empowering them. But I think I'll leave it at that. Maybe in the course of the discussion, we would have answers come out. Thank you.
All right. So let me go to Dr. Asamoah based on the argument that Captain Arthur is saying. Now, there are those who hold the view that some of these trainings for counterterrorism are needless because African countries, right, have been around at least, even though democracy is young, 30 years, African militaries have been there as far back as, what, 50 years plus. So they know how to deal with some of these things. And we do not have, intra-conflict in Africa. We have inter-conflict, right? Most of the conflict we have in Africa are as a result of internal dynamics. So the focus should rather be more on what? Civilian law enforcement and intelligence, rather than making the military so powerful based on these trainings. And when there are no peacekeeping missions, when there's no peacekeeping missions for the military, right? What is there for them to do than to stage a coup d'etat?
Let me make two opening statements, then I will do the unpacking. I think first of all, the relationship between those external trainings and coups, right? The intervening variables are so complex that you need to take all of that into consideration and on a case-by-case basis, right? And I would not say that these trainings are irrelevant. We may have experiences dealing with some issues, domestic conflicts and all of that. But remember that the threats we are dealing with keep evolving very rapidly, and even if you look at from the 1990s all the way till now, the kind of conflicts that we dealt with on the African continent, the ones that you saw in the Mana River Union area, your Liberia, Sierra Leone, and others, fast forward and compare to what we are dealing with in Somalia, right? The issue of Boko Haram. These are totally different dynamics. Now you have a blend of your traditional conflict dynamics plus terrorism and violent extremism. And in some cases, you need to even superimpose on that organized criminality, those who are exploiting the situation. And so the dynamics are so complex that I feel it doesn't take one form of training to be able to win. And so as much as we may want to emphasize the non-military dimensions, it's clear that the military dimensions are also important. On that basis, I feel we should really interrogate the extent to which we are making efforts to also increase the non-military dimensions of those, equipping civil society initiatives, promoting the preventive dimensions much more. How are we working on scaling them up rather than problematizing the aspects that are being increased? I mean, mindful that there is no direct relationship between these trainings and the coups, right? Because if you take the US, for instance, they train thousands, tens of thousands of, foreign military elements per year, some of which are Africans. Now, if you take out of that number, the percentage that get involved in coups, it tells you that the relationship is not direct. And you could also actually raise issues about what caliber of people get that training. Are there people who already have political interests, people who already have gone through certain things that have provoked them into coups and all that? And so there are many variables that come in. I am always very careful about drawing that direct linkages because of the thousands of variables that dictate who ends up being involved in coup. But even if as they say in Ghana, assuming without admitting that was the case, if there was a direct relationship, I think the same can be said of several other countries, right? There are those who have had German training and have been involved. You can also link some of those to Moscow and all of that. And so in that sense, we are inching up to a point where we are saying every form of training to the military can be misused. And I feel a misuse might be more appropriate than just a blanket linking between the two.
Okay,
so that is how I will look at it.
Let's go to the lawyers, right? Where you have international partners, the US, the UK, right? In this case, we are looking at US defense strategy, where we have the US training, right, African military. Who holds this military accountable legally?
Benjamin, well, I'm saying that, let me backtrack a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the military training is relevant and it is important. It's like training for civilians. Everybody aspires to higher degrees, even to the doctorate level, postdoctoral. So for the military, these foreign trainings are development, professional developments, markers in their journey as military officers. But I think when coups occur, the Western world or the global community is worried as to who is emerging as the leader, what type of training has he received, whether he'll be amenable to negotiations to hand over power, whether he'll be amenable to going to transition and all that. So, for instance, if you take the Guinean leader or the Niger leader, both of them have received training in the US. If you take the Gabonese leader, he's received his training in Morocco. So the world wants to know much about who emerges as a leader when a coup occurs. That is why we try to link it to the kind of training that they have occurred. But to say that the training is not important, that one I disagree. The training is relevant.
You agree with me that most of these leaders who have staged coup d'etats have foreign training. So,
yes.
So this is what we get from training them overseas to come and take over our democratic governments.
No. It would be wrong to say that this is what we get. What we are saying is that the trainings are professional development markets in their journey. So it is important. In fact, if you have a leader who is exposed to US training, you can be rest assured that he'll be amenable to talk to the Americans if the Americans come knocking on his door that going to transition for a year or two and handover. But if you have somebody who is from an obscure training, who nobody knows where he emerges from, he could become a strong man who is unwilling to talk to anybody. That is the kind of thinking I want us to have, that whoever emerges, the kind of training or background he has enhances the possibility of the transition. But if we make a blanket statement that that's what we get, that would be a wrong approach. But because Dr. Samoa made an allusion that many officers from around the world receive the same training, but all of them do not end up as heads of states.
All right, so let me go to Dr. Walimara. My question, therefore, is, okay, we are having all these training. Should it be a trainer-trainee or the US on the ground training these people? Because apart from terrorism, apart from the fight on terrorism, how relevant is the military to African countries when we do not have what? Interstate conflict?
Thank you very much. Just maybe to highlight the fact that, and agree with my senior colleague there, that the training is relevant. Obviously to enable professionalism, to enable expertise at whatever levels within the military. But the point that you make, Doc, do you want to have training of trainers, as you say, or so that the kind of training that these African armies are having, you're creating capacity, local capacity within those militaries to train their colleagues? You see frequently that that's not what these international, these so-called world powers are going for. And why? Because they want continued influence over these areas. Ask yourself, how many, for example, if you just even leave the issue of training, how many military bases does the US have on the African continent? How many military bases does France have on the continent? Where are those bases? If you look at where the bases are located, you're going to see that it's where our resources are located. Our African resources are located. Why? If the terrorism is in West Africa and North Africa, why are the bases in these other places and you only have people flying in to do a bit of training and then move away? So the training is not training to win off. Like a mother can breastfeed a child, then eventually they move off the breast and they're able to eat food by themselves. The training is to keep you breastfeeding. And consequently, if you do that with our armies, then the influence stays of that particular country, but the strategic interests, which is usually resources, continues to stay. Obviously, you can talk of areas like the Suez Canal, where there's an international passage, and consequently, you need to have their trade ships secured to access.
But that goes to the U.S. strategy. Right? They are only whatever they do should be in their interest.
Yes. So it's not exact. That's my point. It's not exactly that they are interested in really terrorism. Or, no. The issue is they are here disguised as giving you capacity. Yes, in some sense, they are giving you that capacity, but that's not their main aim. That's like an offshoot of what their main interest is. Their main interest is the resources. Their main interest is the influence, and that if you stand in their influence, they stage a coup. They overthrow you as a leader.
All right, Kwesi, you have the last word, and we'll go to the next segment, the narrative. Yeah, you have the last word, Kwesi. All right, Kwesi, if you're not ready, let's go to Lieutenant Corker. We'll move to the last narrative, then we'll complete this section. All right.
I appreciate the opportunity to add in a few points. One is the U.S. government and the U.S. military. Okay. Superpower, period. Superpower. And so, and that it is what it is, and it speaks for itself. Likewise, the U.S. military speaks for itself. The strongest military in the world, period. And so that's an established fact for now. When the U.S. military partners with an African military, that's a big deal. Period. And so, as again a professional, a U.S. military officer for 30 years, and I have worked with many African militaries. I have also been part of the U.S. security assistance and security cooperation effort. My firsthand knowledge is that when the U.S. military comes into a country, be it Ghana or be it Gambia or be it Senegal or be it Mauritania or be it Cote d'Ivoire, that's a big deal. And it should be a big deal, and it's a big deal for the partner militaries, and so we're proud of doing it. They're proud of receiving it, as one of the other earlier commentators stated, is that part of it is that that's training Africans is routine. And so we train tens and thousands of Africans on an annual basis. Period. And so, it's not so much that we kind of come in and only to give them something, but the idea is that over time, they will have the idea is that they at some first of all, they don't need it. Someone has said, oh, they've been around for years, so for decades, and so this is kind of like an added benefit. And the idea is that they take the added benefit and everything that is given both of what we refer to as mobile training teams going in country, and also the things that we bring many Africans back here to the continental United States to go to send them to war college, to command and staff colleges, to individual and unit training programs. And so at the moment, the U.S. has a robust security cooperation program worldwide. That's a fact. I think that where Africa is getting tripped up, and it's not so, and that is not, and it is one, and U.S. access is a national interest. The U.S. must global access is in the U.S. interest. And so that's why we have the big military and superpower to be able to go wherever we think we have to go, period. And where no one's going to apologize for that interest. And if once the African continent is advances in 50 years or less, and it has its own force to be able to do what? Project power and for its own access, then that will be a different story at that time. But it's in the U.S. interest. Access is in the U.S. interest. Getting back to the training and getting back to each individual country, it's that the issue is that and when I have been partners with training and equipping and listening and taking back lessons learned from African military colleagues, it is we both kind of enhance each other's professionalism. And so, and U.S. military trainers and security assistance partners, we take pride in these relationships. That's one side of the coin, but that does not address the side about the other side that others talk about, Dr. Asamoah and others, is that that's only one aspect of the country and the country's security apparatus. What we don't have is we don't have the luxury, that's a U.S. military, of going in and training all security elements in any given country.
Lieutenant, somebody is saying that what you actually enumerated earlier is what military diplomacy, but we are looking at the defense aspect where these African military are being trained, right, for counterterrorism. So in the absence of counterterrorism, how beneficial is those trainings to defense of the country when there are no interstate conflicts?
So well, that's a good question, and so counterterrorism is the current vogue issue. What all countries need are for all of their instrument. This is the military is one of in every country's instruments of national power. And so the idea is to make sure all instruments are as strong and usable as possible. And so when the U.S. partners with African military, that's the purpose, is to make sure that those instruments are as potent as they possibly can be. Now the challenge though is that when I go into a military and do military bilaterals, is that what I know, having worked with many of the other elements of the security sector, specifically with the police and the law enforcement in Africa, the forces are as Captain said earlier, is they're somewhat intertwined, and some of the countries, the police even go through military basic training before they go and do policing duties. And so, and now what you have, the phenomena is that the U.S. comes in, trains you, that your whole country kind of sees this training and says, well, oh man, well, this must be where the U.S. is emphasizing its support of the security sector with the military. And so that's another added layer into why the military is what first among equals in the security forces. And so that's where part of you're getting the imbalance of security is because this heavy-footed. That the last point here is that with this, you have the U.S. law, and you started off by talking about D3, defense, diplomacy, and development. And by U.S. law, that's who can conduct foreign affairs and foreign relations. And so you don't have kind of the U.S. police doing U.S. police assistance in West Africa. You don't have, you know, the U.S. justice system doing work in throughout Africa. And you don't have the U.S. legislative doing what defense and diplomacy do abroad. And so those aspects of statecraft are less supported and resourced than the defense component. Over.
All right, so we're going to continue. This time we're going to look at military-civilian rule. So I'm going to create a preamble and a narrative, then I'll get back to you, all right? So this is Dr. Hagnipo writes, international partners must broaden engagement beyond train and equip paradigms of devising security assistance to meet operational needs and focus on overall governance and accountability. That's what we were discussing. African governance structure historically have witnessed a strong influence of the defense sector. I use the word defense sector because if you use the word security, that's too broad. So our defense sector, limited to the military and the armed forces, right? In politics, over other law enforcement, what? Now, the military transition to democratic rule in Africa since 1983 has a foundational challenge where the military or the armed forces, which consider themselves as serving as guardians of the democratic transition, play an important and active role in politics and are used as posse comitatus, meaning using the military and armed forces as a police force in the execution of civilian laws. Now, we know historically, most of African democracies, they transition from what? Military to democratic rule. So the military feels that they have that hold. They basically are the guardians of the democracy, right? So this is the question. Lieutenant Tarikwa, you brought the issue up. Do you agree to the narrative that the use of the military, right, as a police force in executing civilian law to counter violent extremism, homegrown terrorism, insurgency, presents a huge security challenge to democratic consolidation in Africa? As the military, as evidenced by Hagnipo's argument, they tend to have so much influence. And if you look at African countries, as the growing resurgence of successful and attempted coup fails, these have illustrated that our military are always hanging out to take over power, which tends to undermine stability, economic development, and even the interest of the military themselves as they seize power from civilian democratic rule. Given the training that they have, right, and the influence that they have in domestic politics. All over Africa, the military have so much influence in domestic politics. Doesn't that make it easy for them to be used in enforcing civilian law, which makes it very, very easy for them to have coup d'etats?
So I think, thank you for the question. It's very complex, and I know Professor Hagnipo and his article, and the practice of military influence in politics. There are my earlier comment, just before your question, addresses some of this, and particularly with the U.S. and what it has done, and that how it has enhanced the military, and so and also so in that context, in the context of as is, and that they have that the military is the security assistance and cooperation has been effective and has served its purpose is one thing. I think getting to the captain's Kwesi's comment, about the CT threat in the region, it's real. And so the question is, okay, well, how do you? Yeah, but you have to address it. And so, but the question is, how do you approach it? Think it could be that and as it says what you were saying, this is a complex issue that takes complex considerations or various different divergent points of view to pursue it. If anything, I think the military is the militaries are shortchanging themselves by trying to handle it all themselves, rather than having a whole of state, if you will, approach. And so that's part of the military getting ahead of itself to have a successful resolution. It's like with many of the other conflicts, it's like the conflict between Israel and Gaza against Hamas, and it's like with Russia and Ukraine. There is you're gonna have to be other there's not going to be there's not going to be a military solution to some of the problems, and some of the problems will only be solved through what, even though I don't like it, diplomacy, and so otherwise. So with that is that with the tribes, and with the Council of Elders and things, that those are viable solutions. And so those are part of kind of the dialogue of trying to prosecute these. I have now that said, I think absolutely with if we're talking about the military or international partners broadening their views and perspectives, that's where you do the greater approach, rather than looking for a military solution. We talk about counterterrorism, and there is I don't know how many people know it, but that is that's a or not counterterrorism per se, but counter violent extremists in the U.S. That's the number one concern, and so that's what our director of the FBI says, and that's what other military leaders say, is that violent extremists is the number one domestic threat. That said, the U.S. military is not there for a number of reasons. The first reason is that the difference between here and there is that, as I mentioned, the director of the FBI. And so a Federal Bureau of Investigation. And so the Federal Bureau of Investigation has tremendous, enormous investigation tools. You don't hear about bureaus of investigations per se on the continent and in the Sahel. And why is that important? Because they're there to do what their title suggests, is to investigate situations. And so that and the intelligence community and others, have other resources to bring to the problem. And that's why where I go to with the military. The military is only one element of this entire security team, and most recently in the Gambia with they have a broad 7 security institution team. And so those in Mali, you have a security team. In Niger, look for a security team. Burkina Faso, Guinea, so on and so forth. And so don't kind of put all your eggs in one basket and look for a military solution.
So, okay, thank you very much. Let me go to the 2 lawyers that we have, right? So Lieutenant Tatogo was talking about counter-violent extremism, which is mostly internal, right? Radicalism within the country. should the military, knowing their influence in politics and how strong they have been made based on their training, should they be executing civilian laws? Let's go to Walemari. And what are going to be the consequences if we have the military executing what? Civilian law.
Thank you very much. I think we should start from the very foundation that civilian rule or civilian authority is supposed to be at the top and not the other way around, not military authority. And perhaps I should just read a case from the US, since we have a senior colleague here from the US. This case is Bissonnette versus Hague. It's from the 8th Circuit Court. It's a 1985 case. And in that case, the court said, civilian rule is a basic to our system of government. The use of military forces to seize civilians can expose civilian government to the threat of military rule and the suspension of constitutional liberties. So that's the beginning of my point, that the military civilian authority is supposed to be at the top of any form of governance. Two, that the role of the military should be separated from the role of the police. The role of the police is clear, and I will also quote you some few examples. From the process of, since we have military people here, the process of recruitment of police officers is very different from the process of recruitment of army officers. The process of training army officers is very different from the process of training police officers. The functions, when they come out of the training and now they are on duty, the functions of police officers are very different from the functions of army officers. If you just look at the simple principle of use of force in the police. Use of force in the police is the minimum force necessary. Use of force in the military is maximum force. I don't want to go into the other examples. Consequently, if you are going to have mix up these roles, it's then going to interfere with these constitutional guarantees of civil liberties. Two, if you deploy the military into these domestic affairs, you're going to have challenges with extrajudicial killings. You're going to have challenges with violation of basic human rights. If I arrest a terrorist, let's just use this maxim of use of force that's used by both the military and the police. If a police officer who is trained arrests a terrorist in a town, in a city, if we apply this example of use of force, what's going to happen to that alleged terrorist? Because they are still a suspect. They have not been gone through due process, they have not gone to court, they have not been tried, it has not been proved that indeed they are a terrorist. If you get a police officer, the likelihood who is enforcing, who is working for enforcement against terrorism, the likelihood that that suspected terrorist survives is high. If you have the military deployed to counter these alleged terrorists, that person will be dead. They will not have their day in court. That will definitely be an extrajudicial killing. So perhaps the middle ground, perhaps the compromise would be, yes, train the police officers, train the police officers for their law and order function and the civilian authorities, but enhance those capabilities to then deal with these threats of civilians who are now terrorists who require slightly enhanced capacity, because they will already have had that training where if somebody is found allegedly committing a crime, they are supposed to be arrested and tried, processed. The evidence is supposed to be collected. They are taken to court, tried. If you get an army officer into this situation, they do not have skills to investigate. They do not have skills to collect evidence that is cogent enough to then lead to the conviction of this terrorist. So I would suggest that the compromise would be to enhance the capacity of the police officers, train them as police officers, enhance their capacity a bit to be able to deal with these domestic issues, because they then have the capacity to gather the evidence, investigate whether indeed this person is a terrorist or not. I would suggest there's a movie, I forget it's called The Eye in Something. I would suggest your colleagues here watch it. It's about the US and how it uses drones to drop bombs in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and so on. And that movie makes a very good point that I'm making here.
All right, so let me get to Mr. Adadivo, right? Based on the two analyses that we've received, right? In the US, for example, where we have extremism in the United States, we don't use the military because, like I said, the military is opposed to, we have an act, right? Does it mean that African countries, right, using the military to enforce civilian rule have a foundational question in their constitution where they allow this thing to take place? Sometimes we have the president using the military for regime protection to commit extrajudicial killings, right? Isn't it a foundational issue? Because in the US, because of their history, they were able to insert that into their constitution in 1878 because they knew the impact of military on civilian government. So does it mean that African countries right from the get-go missed that point, saying we do not allow the military to engage in internal civilian law enforcement unless under what? Extraordinary circumstances, which must be authorized by their various legislative bodies?
Well, thank you for the question. I think that we need to look at the US situation again. The post-Comitatus, right?
Yeah.
It's not a blanket law that says that the military cannot be used. The US has a dual system. They have their armed forces, which is for external security operations and whatever geopolitical operations around the world. But they have the National Guard. And this National Guard are soldiers. And if you take the Capitol Hill revolt or insurrection, the National Guard had to be called in because the insurrectionists had weapons. They were armed. So the regular police could not deal with the insurrection. So the National Guard had to be called in. Indeed, for the first time, tanks rolled on Washington, D.C. streets, which is not something that should be allowed. But the National Guard had to be called in. So I think that we don't have the luxury in Africa to have a dual system where we have a National Guard and the external military forces. We have a unified system. So calling the military into domestic law enforcement or security situations is on case-by-case basis. An assessment has to be made, the security situation, its nature, are there weapons involved, who are involved? Those are those determinants will determine whether the government...
Okay, who authorizes the use of military in enforcing domestic civilian law? Who should authorize that?
It's the civilian authorities.
The legislature?
It's the civilian authorities.
No,
I think that they make an assessment as to the nature of the conflict.
Okay, you saw what happened in Techiman, right? Where 8 people were killed, right?
Yes.
Who made a call to use the military? Was it the president or was it the legislature?
That one is a murky. You're talking about the electoral violence, right?
Right. Which is civilian.
The electoral violence, the forces that were used, we have a problem. I don't want to open a Pandora's box, but we have a problem with some illegal forces in the system. They are armed, they are trained, but they are not regular military officers. And they are party apparatchiks, party authorities use them as and when they want in electoral processes. But what I want to say generally is that depending on the security situation, the architecture, the nature of the situation and the weapons involved and the people involved will determine whether the military has to be called in. And sometimes the military is used as a backup for the police force, because the police force are not equipped to deal with some situations. So you find that in parts of Ghana where we have communal violence,
I'm trying to
like
disagree,
Boko,
because
for
the
instance,
moment you
is
the
the
moment
military
you,
that...
No, I'm trying to disagree
Yes.
somewhere. The moment you enter into democratic or civilian government, then it means
Yes.
what you have to enforce, you have to back up your civilian law enforcement, right? That is clearly established. We are looking at the perspective where the military has been equipped. They have been partnered and they have been equipped. And historically, we know the role of the military in domestic politics. We know they have so much influence in domestic politics, right? So the question is, why do you bring them? It's a history. We know the history of the military in Africa. Since we saw what happened in Ghana, we see extrajudicial killing, we see all these things. So why do we bring them, based on what Dr. Wamira was saying, why do we bring them into enforcing civilian law when we know the outcome, that if they go in, this is what we are going to do? Why didn't we put it in our constitution like the US did and say what? It is going to be only Congress. That's you look at a situation where you were trying to look at what happened during the Black Lives Matter, right? Don't forget, the National Guard falls within, it's in Washington, D.C. So they fall under the authority of the president. So the president can call it, but the president cannot call in what? The military or the armed forces from another state without authorization from the governor of that state.
Well, I understand the complexity of what you are referring to, but I think that in our peculiar, we have a historical antecedent, which we cannot run away from. The military have been involved in governance right from the 60s up to today in Africa. And I think that sometimes trying to solve the problem, we may create another problem. If you take the Sudan conflict now in Khartoum, it's between the regular forces and a paramilitary group as to who is supremacy between their leaders. Is a conflict now happening in Sudan. I know we are talking about sub-Saharan Africa, so I'll not belabor that point. But what I'm trying to say is that it's our history. We cannot run away from it. But I think that we need to create an environment where it must be clear who is calling the military into the local situation. It must be clear who makes the call. And we must establish some parameters where the call is made, whether those parameters were made, so that if the parameters were not made, you can be judicially tried for calling the military illegally into a civilian or domestic situation. I think something like that will help address
so
the
that's
issue.
why we're saying that the African Constitution have say what? Foundational challenges right from the get-go, but the US, they were able to establish it. Now let's come to you, Mr. Kwesi Barnes, right? It seems like everything is circulating around you. You have had all the trainings, you have had all the partners, you are so much equipped, and we know there are internal conflicts within the African states, right? Should you be executing civilian law as a military officer? I don't want to use the word security sector, right? Because that is too broad. I want to make a clear distinction between the defense sector and the intelligence sector, which has to do with law enforcement. So I'll try as much as possible to separate the two, right? Should you, as a defense person, be executing law and order internally within the country?
Okay, so thank you very much. Let me backtrack a little bit. I think something I didn't get the name right. He mentioned something.
Okay, Walamari, correct. Go ahead.
Yes.
Then Walamari, go ahead.
Yes. He tried to differentiate between the kind of force the military uses and then that's which the civil police uses. So he indicated that when the police uses force, it is minimum force, but when the military uses force, it is a maximum force. Well, due to the contemporary nature of our deployments and then how we are employed, the use of force is not always maximum or deadly force. That is by the military. Okay. Because now the military doesn't have anything like Posse Comitatus, we are used to, as you would see, enforce civilian law, which is not entirely the case. Now,
yeah, but most of
should
us
the
would,
military-
most of us on this panel will disagree with you that the military uses minimum restraint. We know the military in Africa, the Slavs, you are going to get a kicking. We know all these things. So police minimum what force is never the same as what military use of force. The two can never be the same.
So to answer that, first of all, we have rules of engagement. So depending on the context in which you are deployed, if you are deployed to do national defense or defend territorial integrity, obviously you are going for maximum brute deadly force. But if you are being deployed within to, say, execute law enforcement, you have limits. And like I said, there are rules of engagements, which if you go contrary to, you would have to face the full rigors of the law. And so a typical example, you mentioned the Techiman case.
Yeah.
All those who were found culpable, yes, were dealt with.
They are dealt with
They were-
in what, in a civilian court, or is it in military courts?
So there was a joint committee between the military and then I think some civilian lawyers. They sat together to determine how the case should be handled. And they relegated it to the military to handle.
So,
And so,
so basically what you are saying here is that they committed a crime enforcing civilian law, but a group of people sat down and took them to a different place. But then who holds them account? Where is the accountability to the civilian population?
So a committee was set up. Okay, a national committee. I mean, it was set up by government to sit and then look into the matter, the circumstances surrounding what happened, and then why brute force was used. Yes, and it composed some senior military officers as well as our civilian counterparts. They sat to discuss extensively the matter, and I think that from evidence gathered and from from the evidence they were able to gather, they decided to allow the military to deal with it. So it became more like within the military jurisdiction, and so that's what was done. Okay. Now let me go on also to say that you mentioned something about the US not using their army within just because of the Posse Comitatus Act.
Correct.
And that they do counterterrorism, but they don't use their army. Yeah. It may interest you to know that the US on the Global Terrorism Index as of 2023 was 0.
Okay, so
over the past few years, yes, over the past few years, it has been 0. And so it might be US hasn't had active terrorism to deal with internally. Even if they do, they have the Department of Homeland Security to ensure whether it's cyber threat, whatever it is, they're able to deal with it. They also have the National Guard, which consists of the Army Reserve, which they could call on in the event that they have to deal with issues of terrorism. Now, let me go back to the document you sent, which is the U.S. defense strategy on delivering democratic security dividends. The last point says that the U.S. will prioritize counterterrorism resources to reduce the threats from terrorist groups to the U.S. homeland persons, to the U.S. homeland persons and diplomatic and military facilities, directing unilateral capability only where lawful and where the threat is most acute. This basically explains to all of us that the U.S. is basically conducting these training activities because of their interests. However, we are not going to look at just their interests. We are also going to look at the flip side. I think it was mentioned in the chats that we are also able to benefit from whatever training that they give us. It enables, it helps us in our career advancements. So I want to look at the positive sides of the training we have with the United Nations, the United States armies. They have been in Afghanistan for over 20 years. They've been fighting active terrorism, that is in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and then in the Middle East. So they have direct experience, which we do not have. It is quite new. I mean, less than two decades since we started fighting terrorism in Africa. And so they have that technical expertise, know-how, and a direct experience, which they need to bring on board to help us to train and equip ourselves to stand the glaring threats which we face now. Obviously, you will not see Ghana fighting against Togo, neither would you see Kenya fighting against Uganda or any other country. The threats that we face now are basically from terrorists. And how do we enhance or build our capacity to be able to respond to those threats is by joint training with countries that have experienced it directly. I hope you are getting what I'm saying. So then,
absolutely,
let me come back to Ghana. Ghana, I mean, a case in point, being the military being employed in internal security operations. Recently, I think about some few months ago, there was this Operation Desert Rock. And this Desert Rock was a joint operation between the military, the immigration, and customs. It was aimed at driving away the nomadic herdsmen, some of which had been identified to be the terrorists whom had fled Burkina Faso because due to the active state of military operations being conducted by the military government, the country had become untenable for them. So they see Ghana as a safe haven. Now they have crossed borders and are occupying our border towns, moving into local communities, conducting raids, conducting cattle. There's been cattle rustling, there's been armed robberies, and all those things. And so there was a need for operations like this to be conducted. Is the police well equipped to conduct some of these operations? Obviously, no. So definitely there has to be that military involvement.
Okay, when you say the police, when you say there's the police equipped to do that, is it not because we have not provided adequate resources to the police, and most of the resources have gone to the military? That is why the military is so much equipped.
That may be true in some sense. I may agree with you. However, if you look at some of the weapon systems that are being used by these terrorist groups, obviously the police cannot go beyond small arms. The police obviously will have their sidearms, their normal small arms. But if it goes to heavy weapons, the police should not have those ones because of their core role, their core mandate of ensuring internal security. This has to be left to the military to handle. And that is what we see ourselves doing some of the time. So currently, as we speak, I would want to draw reference to the situation in Boko. The police doesn't even have enough personnel. They don't even have enough personnel. There are not enough police stations in Boko for the police to handle these things. So when it happens, sometimes you may see the police having to call the military directly to get involved in some of these internal security operations. And so it is very necessary that at some point in time, you have the military come in to help the police in internal security efforts, not to necessarily enforce civilian law and order. I agree with you when you say that the military shouldn't be enforcing civilian law and order. That's why I said there was a striking difference between the two of them, because sometimes the situation at hand overwhelms the police, for which reason we have to move in. But the thing is that when we move in, do we understand our democracy so much that the power doesn't get us drunk? If that is there, and we understand our democratic principles very, very well, then it doesn't have to be a problem. A typical example is the United States. Just like one of the panelists, the experienced military officer, said, it is arguably the most powerful military in the world. I won't say the most powerful, but arguably the most powerful military in the world, where the military leaders have so much power. They have so much power, but are they abusing the power? No, they are not abusing the power. Has there been a case of...
Okay, let's clarify certain things, right? No matter how powerful the U.S. military is, they do not have influence in internal politics, right? There's a history, right? But in Africa, right, the police, the military, whether they are powerful or not, they still have... okay, hold on. Let me go to Dr. Atasamoah. What is the way out of the situation that we find ourselves in terms of using the military in enforcing civilian laws, which has contributed to most of the coup d'etats? I saw an article by ISS, which is talking about trying to find second generation norms, right, to avoid some of this. What is the way forward to avoid some of these conflicts, which we can go back and say they are just foundational things that we should have done way back that we couldn't do? What should be the way out in this situation we find ourselves?
I think in many of the cases, we need to revisit the way in which we carried out our security sector reforms, the civilian oversight of the security sector. I think that is very important. Second is for us to then appreciate the fact that, you made a point before you handed over to me, the fact that in the US, this whole practice has a history. right? And so I think we also need to appreciate that we need then, based on the excesses we are seeing, go along in terms of making laws that tighten all these experiences as we go. And of course, learning from all the best lessons that we can get from particularly the continent.
Okay.
Because as Kwesi said, we are increasingly, the requirements are that we need to use them. And I'm saying that advisedly, because the construct of security threats, you know, there's a blurring of the lines between what is internal and what is external. If you look at now the onslaught of security threats coming from Burkina Faso down, you can't say it's purely external and you can't say it's purely internal too. So you certainly need a blend. We need a flexibility to be able to use the military if that is what is required to keep our people safe. But we then need the lawyers to fix all the gaps that come with that usage. Oversight, accountability, and particularly also not being attracted to overly use of the military. We need to prioritize non-military options first before we go to the military use. But if we need to use it, then we have to use it with all the safeguards, you know, whatever rules of engagement they go with, the use of force requirements, everything is strictly prescribed. So it's not abuse. But we can't do that outside a conscious depoliticization of the army, right? Because, you know, it's not like the army wants to be in the politics. It's sometimes we suck them into politics and then blame them for what happens when they start to enjoy the powers that come with it. And so how do we also learn from the excesses that come with the politicization of the army? And I think in some countries, it's very clear that the army is politicized. And the danger is that you find in some countries the top military brass is in bed with the political class, right? And so those who suffer and complain are those down there. So how do we make sure that this doesn't also create issues going forward? So that is how I will look at it. And so I therefore agree with the comment, the research that we put out to say that we need other legal instruments and frameworks to guide and safeguard all these. Remember that there are regional provisions, there are continental provisions. How do we domesticate them and learn from the best practices and make sure that we don't go into the excesses? And that ties into the point I made, Cecil, that look, we need to trust the process and learn from it and refine, you know, the excesses. And for countries like Ghana, where the lawyers have a lot of work to do and make all the money, I think you have to continuously refine the issues as we make the mistakes. For instance, I haven't seen a lot of conversation about the situation where the army ended up in parliament. And I haven't seen anyone raising it to the extent that it doesn't happen again.
Right.
Have we tightened the laws so that it doesn't happen? I mean, all of that.
All right, so thank you very much. Let's come to you, Cecil. All right, what is the way forward, the situation that we find ourselves?
I think that I'll take you from Dr. Samuel's word, flexibility. We don't have to cast this in iron or stone. There must be some flexibility to create some parameters around which the military can be deployed if necessary. Because let's say it's not only conflict. You can even have natural disasters like floods, earthquakes, and the rest. And the military
those ones
to be deployed.
Those ones we know that, but we are talking about execution of civilian law, like the case where we have in Parliament, the case at Techima. What happened to Chad about 2 weeks ago? Why should we be engaging the military to do all this sort of stuff?
I think that it creates a question in the minds of the law makers or the framers of the Constitution that we need to take a look at the law of military deployment.
Okay.
I think there's a vacuum. There need to be developed some norms or some legal rules to govern that arrangement so that it is clear-cut. We know who has oversight, who makes the call, under what circumstances you make the call, and the limits under which the military are deployed, the rules of engagement. I think some law around that will fill the vacuum. But the key word there is flexibility. We cannot import wholly what is happening in the US and implement it fully in Ghana because one, our military force is so small in terms of size and numbers. So we cannot have a National Guard and a military proper as it were. So we need to have that flexibility. So the catchword is that there's a vacuum, legal vacuum. A law ought to be crafted around that. And the need for that law, my learned friend from, is it Uganda? Eh?
Yes, Uganda, yeah.
Uganda has alluded to the basic training of police officers and the military as being entirely different. And the policemen are more trained to use minimum force. They are trained to investigate. They are trained to look at the rights of suspects and also to seek judicial determination, as opposed to the military who do not have that training. So the key word there is flexibility, and there's a need for legal norms to be developed.
Sure. All right. Thank you very much. So, like, going back to what Cecil and Dr. Asamoah just said, legal norms, right? So, Dr. Walimara, what is the way forward? You have had so much experience in Uganda. You know what prevails over there. So, what do you think is the way forward? Say flexibility and safeguarding, right? So, let's hear from you. Before we go to our two military officers, right? Go ahead.
I think even if you look at the US law gives exceptions. Like my senior colleague from Ghana has been mentioning, it mentions domestic threats, it mentions disasters, it mentions insurrections, like the one they were referring to by Trump and
correct. Yeah.
his emotional characters who are supporting him. But it restricts, it gives those exceptions and restricts those exceptions. And they have been around since 18-something. The law is really very
1878, old. Correct, yeah.
Perhaps that model could be followed in our African states. That there is a law that provides these exceptions where the president would not need to go to a parliament or to a national body to seek authorization. Why? The nature of agency of these activities. If it's a national disaster, you can't wait for members of parliament to convene from wherever they are, then to debate whether they should allow the president to deploy or not. I mean, it doesn't make sense because of the urgency of the matter. If it's an insurrection, it's still urgency. If it's terrorism, it's still urgency. So those that are well known, that require the commander-in-chief to immediately deploy the army, those exceptions should be somewhere in the law that gives an exception. Obviously, it could be the national constitution. Perhaps the compromise that I would bring in there, that if the army is being deployed, and I know some countries do this, is that the army is mixed with the police officers. Like the deployment, if you have 70% troops from the army, you have about 30% from the police, and then the police is taking the lead on this until when that situation stabilizes, and then you go reducing the military deployment further until they are back to the barracks, to their function that ordinarily they should perform. So that would be a bit of a compromise on how to handle this. And the US has been doing it very well. I know Bush tried to confuse it. He brought some law that then went against this very act that they have had for many decades. but the amendment was made. So our countries could use that, either in the constitution, the exceptions could be put in the constitution or somewhere in some legal framework.
Yeah, so you are going back to the foundational question that the thing that we didn't do right from the beginning, right? That is what is going after. Let's go to Captain Kwesi, right? So Captain Kwesi, I want you to take into consideration when you are closing on this particular issue. Don't you think that the proximity of the military in the big cities, right, in the absence of peace, in the absence of peacekeeping and all these things, also serve as one of the reasons why, when there's political instability or economic instability, they are able to take over government instead of them being the barracks being at the outskirts, far away from the big cities. Take that into consideration in you talking about the way forward.
Okay, so I agree with you. I'll first of all start by saying an idle hand remains the devil's workshop. Yes, and so if there's nothing to occupy you, you start conceiving thoughts. Yes, and obviously in the military, acceding power would be one of the things that you may think about, especially when there's economic instability, and then the people are crying for it. So I think yes, it is a point. But then I would also want to support the points already raised by my senior panelists. The fact that we need legislation to determine, first of all, who can deploy the military. Our constitution, Ghana as a case in point, gives so much power to the executive. The executive holds so much power, and so the regional minister or even an MP can just call any military installation and then just deploy you on an operation, which I think is a problem. So it has to be addressed. It has to be addressed so that going back again to the Posse Comitatus Act, where unless by an act of Congress, the military cannot be deployed internally. I think that if we go back to those things and empower our legislature to determine us when the military should be employed or deployed on operations, I think that it will help a lot, because there are going to be so many considerations from the very many people we have in parliament. They are able to determine, there's so many considerations will come up, there are going to be so many deliberations. And then I think that if they find the need for deployment of the military in internal security operations necessary or imperative, whatever decision they take, I think that it will hold water, it will make a lot of sense, and it will reduce some of these things that we are seeing. Then again, after, say, issues have escalated and then we have the unlikely event of a coup d'etat, I think that I may want to support one thing that Professor Tiku said, that we need this second generation anti-coup norms, which will be regulated, in my personal opinion, by regional bodies. So they oversee the enforcement of some of these second generation anti-coup norms to ensure that it doesn't happen again. If you compare what happened in Niger, where the chief of defense staffs of ECOWAS had to meet and then plan to deploy Ghanaian troops, no concrete decision was taken. So I think that we need to go a little firm and then rigid. If this Niger thing was decided on, we could quickly channel funds into the deployment of military troops or take active measures into controlling these military coup d'etats. I think that it will not happen again. So first of all, yes, I think that Ghana, we need regulations to determine when and where the military should be employed, who can deploy the military, which I think shouldn't be the executive. And then in the events that it happens, and then we have these events of coup d'etats, then we can have this anti-coup norms regulated by the regional bodies to ensure that it is under control.
All right. Thank you very much. So let's come to Lieutenant Adkoka. We want to hear your view on the way forward, taking into consideration that every African country has in its backyard another coup d'etat, yet to explode, right? So what are your thoughts about the way forward, right, in terms of military civilian rule, right, to avoid some of these conflicts and some of these coups, to create stability, economic development, and for the interest of the military themselves, for people to look at them in a very good light, especially those of us in the West, right?
Thank you for the opportunity to comment in this regard. On the way forward, I do like the others with the second generation norms and and that kind of translates to what laws and policies. And so with one of the when we were doing security sector reform in the Gambia, we had strategic priorities, and when one is the overarching legal and policy frameworks. And so that's the foundation. It starts with the laws, and so with the laws, then you have the policies, and then you kind of implement. But absent of the laws, then you are leaving folks to their own devices and to solve the problems. And likewise with the Posse Comitatus law. And now there one speaker said, well, we didn't do that, but that doesn't mean you can't. And so with what Professor Soma's saying, yeah, we can be proactive and do some things and add some items, if you will, to our the things that we're working on. I have the interesting comment about the proximity of militaries in the big cities, and so that is, yeah, if you have the military there in the city near the capital, and as Captain Kwesi mentioned, yeah, idle minds are the devil's workshop, and so you also mentioned earlier about low-hanging fruit. And so when you're giving all those factors, it's easy for those wanting to do it. I would now on that we had mentioned before is that just in for Captain Kwesi and the others, that's one of the trademarks of our military in West Africa is their enjoyment of displaying wearing the uniform, and we refer to it as wearing the uniform in public. And that's that is a major restriction in the U.S. Much like you don't have the military deployed on American soil, the U.S. armed forces are also restricted from wearing uniforms in public for the most part. So you absolutely can wear it from your barracks to your workspace, and from your workspace back. But the moment you go out in the general public, you have to put that uniform in the closet or somewhere. And so because that's very effective. One of the reasons is because we don't want this overwhelming military presence kind of walking around in the streets. Because it's intimidating to the general public, and two, it's also kind of gives the military personnel the strength to say, okay, well, I'm wearing this uniform, I'm proud of it, and therefore I'm a force to be reckoned with. And so, but that's also kind of what you see. And so one thing is that just think about it is that should we be wearing the military in public, and not only wearing it in public, but military seem to forget that they're part of the public as well. And so the public consists of both civilians and military. And so there's no separation. We're all part of the Ghanaian public. We're the Ghanaian body or the U.S. body, and so forth. And again, that underscores the democracy. It underscores the people, and the unity of the people, and mobilizing the people to do big things. The for the coups and all is it also with ECOWAS, the regional bodies, and the AU is that coup people have to be held accountable. And so here in the U.S. we have a person who wants to be above the law and not held accountable. The Africa Union and Africa and the countries need to make themselves coup-proof. But how? By when someone does it, apprehend them, lock them up, put them in jail, and do something else. But there is we must solve it, and everyone takes an oath of office. you know, in the military that I served in, we had to, you know, repeat that oath of office on a regular basis, and likewise, you know, most of the Africans should be doing it as well. And also that kind of gets to some of the African militaries being stagnant. And by that, you know, the folks have limited promotion possibility and advancement and so on and so forth. And that's also a reflection of not refreshing the oath of office on a regular basis to keep the people sharp and professional. In the police, one commenter mentioned about the different types of recruitment. My experience, and again, I mentioned that they have. I would just take a look at that, because many of the places, the forces, because some of the speakers have already talked about small budgets and kind of maximizing what limited resources you have. A lot of the training starts off, you know, combined, and so, you know, the military is training with the police and so, and then they kind of branch off and do some others. Now, that said, also the disturbing thing that I observed is that after the police do the military basic training, the police training is not sufficient. Okay, and so you have a police officer who's gone through basic training, and the basic training is military basic training, and that's basically in addition to individual training, it's more so unit training. And so in their mentality, you know, that's their mentality is to serve in squads or fire teams or platoons and so forth, not policing, not for law enforcement. And so they don't get very much law enforcement training in law enforcement. And not only then, on top of that, with the police in many of the countries, they don't know how to enforce the law. They don't know what the law is. And so I've been stopped by many police officers throughout West Africa, and I said, well, okay, why are you stopping me? And they just stopped me because, hey, I'm an American, and they want some coffee money or something like this. But when I asked them, you know, what law did I violate, or what law are you trying to enforce walking around town or in community, they're not enforcing any laws. They're just in the public. They're not enforcing laws. They're not using investigative skills. They're not doing A, B, and C. And so it requires it there. That's an essential for law enforcement to receive significant enhancement. Last point is that you have security is a team effort. And so it cannot be solved by the military or by the police or by investigators or by intelligence or by and anyone. It's a law. One of the many things in the U.S., particularly with Homeland Security and others, is that we have, you know, these joint interagency, you know, operating teams, you know, regionally throughout the country. And so they have looking at an issue as much as best they can in a holistic manner. And that's also kind of one of the byproducts of 9/11 that showed us that we were disjointed. And so, you know, we had a lot of information, but because we did not have all of this integration and coordination, we had the information, but we could not. It was not coordinated to the point that it was effective, and that it could have. It was a deterrent to the attack. And likewise with the most recent insurrection, there's a lot of information around there, but there were some challenges getting it all together. Look at the security challenges holistically. Over. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Right, so we can all agree that Sankofa, we can go back to our roots and try to look at the things that work in the past, those that doesn't work, and we should try to have what they call a second generation norm to be able to deal with some of these things in terms of military civilian cooperation. All right, time is far spent, so I'll give each of you 1 minute to do your closing remarks. Then we'll continue next week. Or let's start with Dr. Samoa. Your closing remarks briefly. Time is fast spent. Go ahead.
I feel that the current wave of coups we are having, it's a clarion call. It means that, you know, there's something fundamentally wrong with the way we are managing the democracies we've opted to go with. And so it's a clarion call because we need to tighten the missteps that we are seeing, but we also need to go back to the delivery of the state, the functionality of the state. How relevant is the average state to the lives of its citizens? That is very important going forward. But I feel that amongst all of it, we need to also have political consensus to agree that as much as we may not like all that comes with democracy, we can work within the dictates of democracy to refine what we want and to get the best out of it. The state process is an unfinished business, so we will see a lot of mistakes being done, but we need to trust the process. We need to work it, and each step in the right direction needs to be sustained with the right laws, with the right commitment, and with the right support. That is the only way we can make the progress and sustain it. If we are going to go back into coups, we are almost always resetting and reconstructing the state from scratch. And from those of us from Ghana, we know what that entails. It's a whole generation of work, and sometimes you never get it right. So that will be my parting shots, that we are at a point where we are being called to think critically, sustain what we have, and refine further. It's the only way we can make progress.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go to Dr. Willemara. Your closing remarks, very, very brief.
Okay, so very quickly, I'll go back to the very foundation that I began with. This African state that is created in 1884, December and January of 1885, is it an African state? Or it is a European state in Africa? And consequently, if you have that foundation, you then have challenges with what comes with that state. And that includes the governance mode, which we call democracy, representative democracy. Is it working? The coups are a consequence of this failed state, European state that Africa has adopted. Should we go back to the ground? I know my colleagues are saying we have moved so far, we cannot go backwards. But you may move so far and you're simply copying and pasting. And consequently, the problem cannot be resolved. Is this the best governance format for Africa? And if it's not the best, and as a result, it's creating all these challenges, stolen elections, strong men, influenced by America and France for their own interests. Consequently, you will work at this state, but I don't know, or you work at this democracy, and this democracy at the end will not be democratic. So we need to do a bit of thinking around that. There are no easy answers on how to go finally deal with it.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go to Captain Arthur. Kwesi, let's hear a closing remark very briefly.
Okay, thank you very much. So this has been a very insightful topic. I think that so much has been said. However, I think that basically we have decided to embrace democracy and then practice democracy as a nation. In practicing the democracy, we should be able to celebrate our little successes. I mean, despite the fact that we've practiced democracy for just a little over 30 years, we should celebrate our successes, but not rest on our oars. The basic causes or the underlying causes of some of these coup d'etats, first of all, will be the fact that there are economic issues, the economic problems. How are these economic problems being addressed? Because if there's no economic issue giving rise to thoughts of people wanting to agitate on social media, in the streets, and then make people conceive the idea of a coup d'etat, I don't think it will even ever come up. So yes, there are pragmatic steps that are going to be put in place, just like we've all suggested, and putting up legislature, adopting a framework that can determine when the military person is employed or deployed on an operation, the anti-coup norms. I mean, all those ones are there. But I think that we should also look at how we can effectively manage our economy to prevent such instances, to prevent the mere thought of a coup d'etat. I basically think that if we can put some of these things into considerations, we'll be way ahead in trying to solve these coup issues. Thank you very much.
All right, so thank you very much. Lieutenant Cork, I want you to take into consideration what, in your closing remarks, that irrespective of what happens internal, whether economic instability, political instability, the military swear an oath to fidelity to uphold the Constitution. So no matter what happens internally, they don't have any business, right? So take into your consideration when you are making your remarks.
I'm sorry, the military doesn't have what?
They don't have any kind of business in internal what? Politics.
Well, that's exactly right. So that is they know that by training and education and professional development. And so I don't know that you would find any military officers try to make justification that there are for a coup d'etat. They would just as in Ghana, it would be it's not the norm. It's not how everyone was indoctrinated, trained, and swore an oath to. And so you swore an oath to uphold the Constitution and all the orders of everyone appointed over me. And so a coup is simply anathema to an oath of office. And so now that said, it's not limited to African military coups. There are others. There are other national civilian leaders who violate their oath of office as well. And so it happens. Now it is, but that is where things are. I would also offer here. That I think what I don't has not been mentioned yet is in terms of potential counters to coups that is that's the public. And so, we haven't talked about, public uprising, public unrest, or taking action, public protests, as many in the U.S. are familiar with, and as with revolutions throughout history, at some point, the people will get fed up. And then that may put an end to some of some of this and to some of the compression. And I think again the compression is a reflection of some of the direct influences that are bearing on it that has caused this to happen in a compressed amount of time. Now, and so I would the ongoing state building. Let me say, just make the whole. On the one from Uganda, I think. I'm sorry, I may have the country wrong, but in terms of the African state, it is what is it at some point, we mentioned last week, someone has to come up with what they think that, conceptually what that is. If we don't think that the democracy is right, if we don't think that autocracy is right, if we don't, if we're not looking at a monarchy, somebody just needs to kind of put in there, okay, here is the alternative to democracy, and so time will tell if one is produced. Over.
All right, thank you very much. Let's Cecil, you have the final word. All right.
First of all, I just want to thank you, Dr. Benjamin, and the organizers for making me part of this meeting. I thank the panelists also for a fruitful deliberation. Well, what I want to say is that democracy must, as President Obama said, we don't need strong men, we need strong institutions. So the system must legitimize itself. How people get on board, if there are issues of corruption, we have an impartial, independent, and fair judiciary to deal with it. If there are issues where any maladministration or any other issue, it is dealt with by the system to prevent terrors, to prevent people from, like in the Gabonese case, where the system could not replace an ailing president who obviously could not continue. I think these are some of the things I think the system must become resilient to deal with these issues, to prevent an outside military force to decide for the people what should be done. So I think that legitimacy is important. Then obviously, the people cannot live on an empty stomach. So the economy is the first and foremost of any governance system. If you get the economy right, there'll be peace, there'll be no trouble, there'll be no unrest. And also, lastly, I want to say that for in future, if ECOWAS wants to deploy to a country, in case of a coup d'etat or whatever, they must be mindful of the United Nations system, where you can only deploy troops outside into a third country with the resolution of the Security Council. So you have to make a case to the Security Council why the deployment has to be made and the justification. And if they vote in favor, then of course you can deploy. But if you deploy without that, it will be illegal and you'll be putting your troops in harm's way. So it's something that I think they should keep at the back of their minds for future events. But having said that, I thank you all and good evening.
All right. Okay. So I should take the opportunity to thank all of you, Dr. Asamoah, Lieutenant Corker, Kwesi, Wilmera, and yourself, right, for appearing on this show. This particular topic is so essential, so critical, given what is happening on the African continent, right? So at this juncture, we've come to the end of another Sankofa African series organized by Bell & Associates Consulting and Budget IT. We hope to see you next week when we are bringing in what we'll talk about anti-LGBT law, which is passed in Ghana. So from the US, I say goodbye to you, all of you, wherever you may be. See you another time. Thank you.
Thank you.